Hello everyone and welcome to today's meeting of the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Just a reminder for members, if you wish to speak, please put it in the chat bar. First item is membership of the committee. I've had apologies from Councillor Davis directly, but officers haven't received any further apologies. If there are, if anyone knows of any, please let me know. Second item, minutes of the previous meeting. If anyone's got anything they want to raise, I don't think they have. No. Right. Number 3, declarations of interest. Does anyone have any interest they'd like to declare? No. Thank you very much. Item 4 is a mission of the public, just to say that most of the items are being considered in the public session, but there will be a private session for some elements of the risk management update and the quarterly report, which are items 10, 11 or 13 and 14 in private session. I don't believe we have any deputations or petitions, do we, Andrea?
We don't, Chair, no.
No, and no questions from the members of the public, which brings us on to item 7, which is the business continuity assurance update. So I'll hand over to the officers to present on that.
Hello, Chair. Sean Westerby, Kirklees Council Emergency Planning team, and on the call with me is Martin Jordan. It's a bit of a double. Yeah, it's a bit of a double act. Martin's my business continuity lead. He's got all the knowledge. I'm just sort of here to help and assist. So I'm going to hand over to Martin for the first bit, which is the business continuity survey.
Okay. Yeah. So 2 reports today. First one's just to walk you through the business continuity survey, the annual assurance survey that we run across the organisation. The second report just outlines how the council has responded to the business continuity element of the COVID response. So the first report, every year we undertake a survey. It's hosted online. It goes to all teams in the organisation just to assess their compliance to the council standard for business continuity. It's a self-complete survey. There's about 30 questions, just asking a number of different things to basically assess compliance. So to give you a flavour of what we've got across the organisation, we've got 108 business continuity champions who are responsible for maintaining plans, ensuring that they're robust, that they're tested, that they're exercised. And we have 82 plans that are written at either a team or service level. And the decision to write plans at either team or a wider service level is decided on by head of service. But we have 82 plans. So this year we had a 42% completion rate for the survey. This lower than usual response is more than likely due to the fact that when we rolled the survey out, a lot of teams were in the thick of it with the COVID response, and so probably didn't have the time to prioritise the survey. The survey just takes you through what we found to be the highlights, so the strengths of business continuity planning across the organisation. So those being assessing risks, understanding what's critical and what's not in each team, testing and exercising of plans, plan accessibility, role competence of officers that have got a key role through the activation of their plan. I mean, it's sort of all in the document. We did find quite a lot of encouraging themes that received high compliance, and there were a couple of themes that also received a lower compliance, which are identified as areas of further work for the next 12 months. So those being maintaining a log of key information, decisions and rationale. So when business is disrupted, it's obviously important to maintain a log of what's going on, what decisions have been made, why those decisions have been made. So further work will be going on to promote that over the next 12 months. And then also we need to work on corporately just gaining more assurance that our critical partners, suppliers and commission services have got adequate plans in place, because often we have interdependencies with them or they have interdependencies with us, and us being affected by business disruption might have a knock-on effect to them and vice versa. So understanding and gaining assurance that we've all got plans in place. And that's really it. That's sort of a summary of the report. Probably the last thing to say is most teams and services did activate their plans as a response in fact, almost all teams have activated their reporters in response to COVID, and a lot of them have still got their plans activated right now. But the second report does cover that in a little bit more detail. That's it, really. I mean, I welcome any questions if anybody's got any.
Councillor Pinnock, would you like to come in first?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much for that. When I was reading it, just one very straightforward comment, and I read the agenda and it says business something or other, business continuity plans or something, and I didn't realise straight away that it was council business continuity assurance, and I just wonder whether we ought to make sure that that's there. Yeah, it wasn't clear to me. Just looking at the agenda items, that's all. Okay. The other thing is, I understand entirely what you're saying about the response rate and all the rest of it. But at 3.4, what you're saying is that there was high compliance scores over 75%, which is, in the circumstances especially is quite good, except for risk assessment. I do wonder whether because I haven't sort of understood entirely which businesses have not done a risk assessment or have not updated their risk assessment, more likely. So that does seem to me to be fairly critical to business continuity, and just would like to hear what you say about that.
Yes, so obviously part of the business continuity planning process is to assess the risks that teams and services face and then try and take action to mitigate those risks. A lot of risks are actually assessed corporately, and it's not giving an excuse to the services that sort of, I'm not sure on whether it was 25 or less percent that hadn't completed the risk assessments or hadn't reviewed it, but a lot of risks are assessed corporately by asset management and IT and others, and the risk associated with that are mitigated where they can. It's not giving an excuse to those services that haven't reviewed the risk assessments, but and it's probably also worth saying that in 3.5, the areas of further work that we'll be working on in the next 12 months, that's not to say we won't be going back and reminding services and working with them to update the risk assessments. Everything we've highlighted in 3.4 will still be pushed out, and we will still work with services to help them to do all those things, the risk assessment, the business impact analysis, etc. But it's just we'll have more focus on the areas that receive lower compliance in 3.5.
I mean, if I can just come back, Will, sorry. I think it would be important for us to know, what proportion of businesses within the council had not done a risk assessment at all, if there are any, and those that had not reviewed it. I just think that's something that is a fairly critical area of concern. If you haven't done a risk assessment, actually most of the other stuff doesn't follow. And I just wonder whether we as a committee ought to be a bit more concerned about that.
Can I come in? If you want to respond, officers, please go ahead. Councillor Pinnock, do you want to perhaps suggest we request an update we can't do it at the next committee meeting as we've got a very packed agenda, but perhaps the meeting after.
Well, I would have thought, I would have thought in, I don't know, where are we now? January. I would have thought sort of May, June time that we ought to have a review, see, especially on that critical one. And which business, which part of the council it was, because if it was, waste collection, you'd think, they really should have an updated risk assessment. For instance, because we don't know. So just have another look and another think about it is what I'm suggesting. That's all.
Yeah, I think you make a fair point, Councillor Pinnock, because they've said we do have the risk management update, which we know is on the agenda today. But as you say, I think you make a fair point, and I think it would be quite good to have an update, perhaps not next meeting, but the meeting after, if that's possible. Steve, do you want to come in, and then we'll ask officers to respond?
Basically, it's just flagging up what Kath's just said. What I'd written down was, does this apply to? Is it just inside buildings? or is it, further afield and include everybody, such as waste collection, such as, gully cleaning, grates, etc. I know sometimes I've seen gully cleaners around where I live, and the typical, we're all right, we're not bothered, we're fine, and we'll get on with it. But I just wondered if they've had so at the end of the day, everybody's entitled to having risk assessments, and it would be just interesting to find out. That's, so yeah, good question, Kath. I think that.
Did you want to come back on that point, Sean?
Yeah.
Or?
Yes, Chair. If I can, I mean, I don't want to beat ourselves up. We tried to be as open, as honest as we can do with this survey, and I think when we say that they haven't done a risk assessment, that might not be the truth. What might be the truth is they haven't documented the risk assessment. I'm sure most services will have done risk assessments. They're very good at doing risk assessments. They're not always very good at documenting it, and we push and push, and we continue to keep pushing. And if the committee helps us with that push, it will build on what we're trying to achieve. But I don't think perhaps it's the wrong terminology we've used when we said they haven't done risk assessment. I think perhaps we ought to have said they haven't documented it. Yeah. What do you?
And just to flag up that obviously it's not a risk assessment about safe working, or it's a risk assessment about the risks to the operation of each service. But yeah, I agree, Sean. I think a lot of them will dynamically do it, and they'll do it in their heads, and it just won't be documented on a template, or it'll be discussed in a meeting, but again, it won't be documented, and risks will come and go, and they'll deal reactively with risks. Yeah, I agree, Sean.
Yeah, thanks for that. As you've just said, with regard to it potentially happening but not being documented, and you mentioned earlier that one of the things that you're picking up is people not necessarily maintaining a log of decisions. That's something that's come up a number of times with the committee this year in Martin's internal audit updates and external audits. We've had particular issues as well. So it's something that does keep coming up, and I think we'll be keeping a closer eye on it, I hope, because I'll want to see some improvement come next year, because we know it keeps coming up, so we know it's an issue. So it's something we've got to push on, I think. Do members have any further questions or comments? Or Sean, did you have anything else finally you wanted to add before we move on?
No, not on that point. I'm ready to cover the next part whenever you're ready, Chair.
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you very much.
Right. So the next report you'll have in front of you is a report we've pulled together looking at our COVID-19 response, which is probably one of the biggest responses that we've had to deal with. Certainly the longest protracted incident we've had to deal with. So the report takes you through sort of a story of how business continuity is formed in the council. So we've got we've got team level plans, we've got a corporate framework, and as we develop plans, sometimes you write a plan because we're required to write a plan, and back of your mind you think that plan will never be used, or you hope the plan will never be used because it's such a big, wide impacting scenario. And I said to Martin, I said, we had the corporate business continuity framework. I says that plan will never be used, and I was completely wrong. But I'm so glad we had written that plan because it helped us manage the business continuity response to this incident. The report only covers the business continuity response. There's a lot more going off to respond to COVID, so please bear with that in mind when you're reading it. How we managed it, we formed sort of regular meetings that covered sort of asset venues, human resources, sit reps, which is allows a two-way reporting mechanism from services to corporate and back. And then we had a business continuity team that looked at schools and learning settings. we've also done a workforce skills audit, which helped us sort of identify key skills that staff had, so that if we needed to, we could deploy them into areas of most need. We set up some recovery and support challenge meetings, which basically act as a critical friend. So as services started to open up services following the initial lockdown, it would like a critical friend to just look at it and just say, are you opening it up as it was, or can you open it up in a different way? And does it fit into other different agendas? So that were going off. We also carried out a pre-winter survey as part of the business continuity process, because we recognised that we were dealing with COVID and we got the normal winter pressures to deal with. So we did a survey to try and sort of identify what foreseeable sort of issues might crop up and what support could be put in place. So that's basically the introduction of the report, and then we went through sort of successes, and basically I won't go read it item for item, but basically the successes were we had good business continuity plans in place. And I know the survey, we beat ourselves up because services might not have documented a risk assessment, or they might not have done another element of the business continuity process. But without exception, we had good business continuity plans in place throughout this council. You know, and one of the things that we did note in our business continuity preparedness is that the exercises and testing of plans that we did pre-COVID stood us in good stead to respond to this COVID response. So that was quite a good thing. And it also gave us the opportunity to test out remote learning. It's probably brought us to a place. Would we have been doing this committee virtually if it wasn't for COVID? I'll just let you, don't have to answer that one, but I'm not saying it's brilliant. I must admit I did like the committee when we could all sit around a table and look at each other. But yeah, we are where we are. What I'm trying to get to is it's brought about quite an accelerated change for the organisation, and there are some good positive aspects of that. We found that the meetings that we set up, so the business continuity sit reps, it were a good mechanism for services to share information and get support back. So there were a lot of learning through that process. The recovery support and challenge sessions, yet again, a lot of good learning out of that. The way that services fed back, that they liked the sort of friendly challenge that came through that process. And we sort of, yeah, our teams have sort of adapted to COVID and being able to change at quite significant pace to what we would normally do. And yeah, we're a big organisation, and sometimes it does feel as though it's a bit like turning a tank around. It doesn't happen straight away. It's got a long turning circle. So I think the stuff we've done through a business continuity response is very positive, if I'm being honest. Obviously, with any response, there are some learning aspects. So some of the stuff we've learned is use technology rather than paper-based systems. So we're trying to integrate business continuity with existing council systems, such as FirmStep, which is it creates e-forms, and that links into information management systems such as Tableau, so we can get real-time information and adapt better to it. Yeah, we some of the templates that we add, we're refining them as we go along. So yeah, it's just a case of learning, continuous learning. That's what I'm trying to get to on that one. I'm just going to look what all there is. What we found, one of the learning we identified as part of the regular meetings we set up. We used to do like a summary comms message, and we found that wasn't going to some of the people that needed it. So we've refined that process, and now Martin's already mentioned business continuity champions. So we circulate that information straight to business continuity champions, so there isn't that gap between your service directors and strategic directors getting information. and then it being passed to business continuity champions. It just makes the process a bit quicker. What else have we got? We try and maintain a list of critical activities that the council has to sort of deliver. So that's usually the services that keep people alive, if we want to be brutally honest. And trying to, the way the council changes, so services do things differently, trying to keep a list such as that up to date is very difficult. So we're going to use the technology that I've just talked about, the integration with systems, to sort of like populate that system. I'm just going to hand over to Martin now, because I'm sure I've probably missed things that he thinks that's important and he wants me to talk about. So, or we need to talk about. Martin, over to you.
To be honest, I think you've covered it really, Sean. There's a lot of successes we took from it. The SITREP process has been a major success, and again, we're like you said, we're refining it. We're not refining it because there was anything wrong with it from initially rolling it out. We're refining it because priorities change. So, for example, right at the start of the first lockdown, we had a really robust SITREP that asked a lot of questions about staffing issues, etc. As we approached summer and that first lockdown ended, we didn't actually need as much information from services, so we reviewed it, we slimmed it down. Now we're in the new lockdown, we're reviewing it again. So it's not changing because there's any problems with it. It's changing to respond to the changing priorities of the organisation and what information we need. And then just on the learning bit, just to summarise all that, COVID has given us a fantastic and unique opportunity to develop our business continuity going forward. It's given us an opportunity that we would have never really had it not been for COVID. It's forced a culture change in the council that I don't think anyone could have driven through, particularly in the time frame that COVID's been going on for. People are working differently. There's a lot of buy-in on business continuity. So post-COVID, just to echo what Sean said, we've already got key officers in IT, transformation, emergency planning, and others, all earmarked and ready to sit down, put pen to paper, and basically relaunch business continuity. And back to Councillor Pinnock's point, that will start at risk assessment, but we don't want to start that now because we're still in the thick of it. We're still responding. Once things settle down, we'll sit down. We'll integrate IT into the whole process. Yeah, that's really it, Sean. I think you covered everything really.
Thank you, Martin. So it's over to the chair and members. Have you got any questions for us?
Thank you very much, Sean and Martin, for that. It was really, really comprehensive and really positive. I think you're absolutely right in what you both said, particularly Sean liked it, what you said, when it feels like you sometimes getting even basic change in the council feels like turning the tank around. But we've definitely been through a period, as you said, of accelerated change, and as you say, it's forced a culture change. And I think it has been, although it's been in response to a crisis none of us wanted, there has been some positive changes for us. It's not a question, just want to make the comment that I've worked, not in my role as a councillor, but in my work outside the council with two of our comparable authorities during the crisis. And I think I've said it at council, but we have, as a council, responded exceptionally. And we should be very proud of ourselves. And I have no doubt that the work that you and your team have done in creating and overseeing the plans that you thought you'd never had to use have certainly played an important role in that. So thank you very much. Councillor Pinnock.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Simpson. I totally agree with what you said, and I wonder if we can record as a committee our thanks and congratulations to the team here, but also to the council workforce for the way they've stepped up to respond to the emergency that we've had. The fact that they managed to continue more or less with waste collection, I thought was amazing, and I know lots of other councils hadn't. And the fact that council staff were willing to be deployed to very different and workplaces than they had, I think is, a testament to what has gone on. So that would be my first point. And the second one is, there has been across councils across the country, across public services across the country, a huge change in the way business has been undertaken. Either committees doing Zoom calls or team calls or whatever, and the challenge will be to continue what has worked well and to discard what hasn't. And so again, it would be good, I don't know, perhaps a year's time when we have this next report, just to see what's really been held on to that's been good. I'm assuming by then, by the way, and then within a year that we will be out of this situation. And what big change. You're right. There's been a big culture change, and that's not just in Kirklees, but across public services. And it'd be really good to review that and see, a before and after picture, because there's some people in government, at the central government, need to understand how flexible and how responsive in a positive way that local public service has been to this challenge. But I do want us to record our thanks, congratulations to the council staff and to the emergency planning team for what has been done.
Absolutely, Kath, thank you for that. I'm sure everyone on the committee will agree with that, and ask Andrea that she please does ensure that we record exactly what you've said there. Our thanks to everyone in the council, and as well as the emergency planning team for everything that they've done. Did any other councillors want to make any comments or questions while we're on this report? No? Right. Steve, are you indicating there? Sorry.
Well, all it is to say, I think I did send a letter off to Examiner 2 or 3 weeks ago about fantastic job that our refuse collectors have been doing this side of Redmond, like due to COVID and then with snow over last week. They were still here roughly at the same time, and I were out and about, and the way that they manoeuvre that wagon in and out of some cul-de-sacs and round some corners, and this, I'm afraid it's got to be said, the way that some people, they don't even attempt to park. So I think a great job to every member of the staff that works, especially outside. It's got to be said they're doing a terrific job. and same thing as well for members of staff that are working inside. But I think there's a lot to learn from this last 12 months. I mean, I never thought we'd be doing committees like this, and they do seem to be working quite well. Whether we want to go back to old committee system where we all turn up, I don't know. When you look at it from where me and Kath come from, and I've no doubt we'll same out at Denbydale, you're wasting nearly an hour travelling into Huddersfield and then travelling back. So you're saving yourself 2 hours a day. So, all things being equal, we've got another 2 hours to do council work and really enjoy what we're doing. I say smirkingly.
Well said, Steve. Thank you very much. Right, unless anyone else has any other comments, I'll thank Sean and Martin for joining us and for your updates, and please pass our thanks on to everyone who's been involved in this work. It's been really positive and we appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
No
Cheers.
worries, thank you. Right, that brings us on to item 8, which is the Treasury Management Strategy 21-22. I'll just point out just before before I hand over to Rachel that there has been a mistake in the wording of the final report that we've received. So there is some suggested revised wording around 2.3.8 in the report, which I'm sure Rachel will go through in her presentation. So I'll hand over to Rachel, and we can discuss after the presentation. So Rachel, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this report is the annual Treasury Management Strategy. It sets out the parameters of how Treasury Management operates. It includes the Treasury Management, investments and borrowing strategies, MRP policy and the investment strategy. So the report is similar to last year's strategy in that continue to recommend a low risk strategy, ensuring the security of the council's cash, protecting capital values from loss, but also liquidity, ensuring the funds are available when needed. Balances of 20 million is recommended in short-term liquid investments to manage day-to-day cash flow requirements. Appendix A highlights the limits on the amounts that can be invested and the duration. Appendix A also shows credit ratings, which are used to assess the risk of defaults. Therefore, only certain counterparties are used. The counterparties are regularly monitored along with Arlene Clause, who inform us of any that may have been downgraded. Returns on these investments are exceptionally low. The money market returns are approximately 0.01%, or some are even at nil return. The Bank of England base rate is still 0.1%, with forecasts to remain the same or even could go down. So the returns from these investments will continue to be minimal. However, they are low risk and provide instant access. So the ongoing COVID issues means the council's cash levels are very volatile at the moment. We are receiving large sums of grants with very little warning, which needs to be managed as effectively as possible to minimise any risks. The majority of the grants are paid out, but there's always a slight timing delay. Excess cash over the counterparty limits, we tend to invest with the Debt Management Office, which is part of HM Treasury. Okay, I'll just discuss a little bit about the borrowing. Again, borrowing on the strategy borrowing will continue to be a mix of short and long term. Table 1 shows the CFR and the borrowing requirements. Both, you'll see they're increasing significantly from the impact of the capital plan. Short-term borrowing rates do remain extremely low. Local authority to local authority market for a month, we can get about 0.01%. 3 months might be 0.03%, so it's very cheap. As mentioned at the last CGAC, there had been a wide consultation on the PWLB's future. The result of that was that HM Treasury reduced rates by 1% on the 26th of November, which resulted in an immediate impact to the borrowing rates. And they came back down to similar levels before the overnight increase back in October 2019. So as PWLB is now more cost effective, the council will look to finance the capital VAT plan with some long-term PWLB loans. However, these loans are no longer available to local authorities that are planning to buy investments for yield. So the council will avoid any such activity so they can still access these loans. The mix of short and long term and the timing of the long term loans will be considered with our advisors as the best time that might be, which is probably very likely to be the first six months of this year. So that's all I really wanted to say. Then just went to the main points there. As mentioned by Will, the paragraph 2.3.8 unfortunately got just overlooked. So it just needs reflecting with the current wording, which we're suggesting is that office a recommendation to maximise the remaining balance of MRP unwind of 49.5 million over the 2020 to 24 period to support the Council's medium-term budget strategy set out in the annual budget report to Cabinet on 26th of January and Budget Council on 10th of February 2021. So sorry about that, that just needs tweaking slightly. Okay, if anybody has any questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and thank you for all the work that you and the team are doing at this, as you say, very challenging and volatile time. I know it's not been easy. Does anyone have any questions or comments, Councillor Pinnock? Oh, you're on mute, Councillor Pinnock. You're the first one. There's always one, Councillor Pinnock.
That's the phrase of the century, isn't it? You're on mute. So thanks very much, Rachel. That was an understandable report. You could see what was going on, which is always helpful, isn't it, for us who don't understand the intricacies of treasury management. Just a question about this 2.38. I had it down before you revised it, because my understanding was that it was, in relation to extending the loan period for the capital that had been borrowed to 50 years, and therefore that released about 9 million a year, I think it was, to support revenue budgets. I thought that was going to end in about 26. And you've just referenced 24.
Yes, that's right.
So what was gone on there?
It was a revision of the MRP. Well, the MRP we changed from a set percentage of how it was calculated to an annuity basis, and we had over-provided quite considerable amount. And you're rightly so, that was going to be spread over a 9-year period.
Yeah.
However, due to sort of the revenue.
Sorry, Rachel.
Go on.
It's James Anderson. It just probably to sort of reiterate that point. It's a reflection of probably the movement over the budget report that's just been released on Monday, I believe, that's gone out, and it just reflects the slightly different way we're releasing, I guess, the MRP reserves that were there. So Rachel's right. The change in policy created effectively a £91 million reserve, if you like, and the idea was that what we could do is we couldn't bring MRP down below zero, and what we agreed back in the day when it first came out was that would release over sort of 9.1 million over 10 years. And probably what's happened since that point is our annual MRP calculation is around sort of 13.5 million. So that is the sort of the extent of the flexibility. We can't make that negative, but we can bring that in sort of in line to a zero position. And what's happened probably over current sort of last probably 2 or 3 years is we've slightly increased that 9.1 million, which was based on an estimate, to actually bring that up to the maximum, which is about 13.5 million. And what that statement reflects now is a slight change that's been reflected in the budget documentation. So it's just sort of the timing across the two. So it just needed to bring back in line with the budget and how we're doing it. So that's what the budget has done, is sort of increase that release up to the maximum level over a shorter period. So we've used the money earlier rather than extending it out over 10 years. So probably it's shunted forward a little bit just to provide us a little bit of flexibility to support the council's need over, well, I guess over COVID essentially, and the wider uncertainty that we've got with having a 1-year settlement yet again, and what we've done is it's probably in the ethos of the overall budget document that's just been released. So does that help?
Yeah. So instead of 9 years, you're doing it over 5. Is that right?
It'll be about that.
Right.
So Eamon probably can. I think it's I think we have shaved off some time. Is that right, Eamon?
Yeah. Is it okay if I come in, Chair, just to add to the conversation? Yeah. Basically, the original flexibility that we had to apply it. We decided originally to do it over 10 years. I think it was 9 or 10 years at a point in time. And for the reasons James has just described, within certain parameters, we can flexibly apply that. We could stretch it out over a longer time frame, or we could make it into a shorter time frame. We have some discretion around that within certain parameters. So we've chosen to do it exactly as you describe. Effectively, we're now applying it over 7 years rather than the original 10. So we brought it forward for the reasons that James has described, in terms of giving us some short-term, I suppose, stability and resilience, because the impacts of COVID, as laid out in the budget report, are going to wash through over the medium-term financial plan.
I mean, just to come back, Will, because this is actually really important for us as an audit committee, is therefore what we're doing is, after the 7 years or 6 years or whatever it will be, we have created a significant cliff edge. Eamon, haven't we?
Yeah.
Eamon,
sorry, I'll
come back.
Yeah. I'll come back in on that. I mean, if you think about what we've actually applied that flexibility for, what we haven't substantively done, which, to be honest, quite a number of councils have done, and it's quite within their remit to do, is use that specifically to offset budget savings requirements as of going to press. So I think certainly for the first few years, we've applied that flexibility, for example, to bolster our financial resilience reserves, was one of the key things, and also to bolster one or two of the other reserves as well for specific strategic development. So we hadn't used it in any substantive sense to cover ongoing budget gap requirements, where we need to make sustainable savings. But I think, basically what we're saying is we're applying the balance of that flexibility to cover off some significant budget gaps, while we get through the other side, certainly of the next 12 months. And the budget report that's set out for Cabinet and Budget Council, and was indeed set out as part of the budget strategy update report, reflects a lot of known unknowns in terms of funding and spending assumptions going forward, given the economic uncertainty. So in effect, what we're doing is flexing that MRP flexibility by bringing some of that forward to help act as a bit of a buffer till we get to the other side of that. So it might be that beyond 21-22, if we get more clarity, for example, about the medium-term position, if we start to get more clarity about some of our funding assumptions, we can potentially revisit some of what we've set out in terms of 22-23 and 23-24 budget assumptions. So we'll always, it's part of the annual cycle that we would always update and review that in light of circumstances. But I think certainly from our perspective, these are unprecedented times, and I know it's an oft-used cliche at the moment, but the fact that we've got that flexibility to bear will help give the council some at least medium-term financial stability, acknowledging that we've still got some forecast forward budget gaps, but those budget gaps in themselves are quite volatile because of the scale of the economic uncertainty. So that's the broad context within which we're operating, and how we're flexibly applying that MRP flexibility to support those plans going forward.
Thank you.
Okay, no worries.
Thank you very much, both of you, for that. I do not want to stifle anyone's contributions. I just want to make people aware that we are inevitably going to run over. So we will have to delay the training session that we've got booked in slightly, but if people could try to keep their comments as succinct as they can whilst getting the point across, that'd be really helpful in terms of us hopefully making it to the training session and not having to delay again. I've seen John's got his hand up. Just before I bring Councillor Taylor in, Councillor Turner, can I invite you to make a comment just about if you've got anything to say about the MRP flexibility? And Rachel also mentioned the PWLB changes meaning that you can't invest commercially just for the yield. That doesn't really affect us, I suspect, does it? Because that's not something that's been our policy or intentions. So if you can just comment on those two things, please, Councillor Taylor.
The MRP, I think, has been covered by Eamon and previous officers. I don't think I have a lot to add to that. It's something this flexibility was something we didn't do early days. We waited a considerable amount of time before we did this. A lot of local authorities did exactly this long before we did. We hung on until we felt the time was right, and that's why we did it when we did. So we were one of the last authorities to invoke that flexibility. So, and as I say, apart from that, I have nothing much to add to that. I think Emma covered it really well. PWLB was a bit of a shock because they put it up overnight. I was at a meeting actually in Wakefield on the day they did it, and there's a lot of consternation around the other members and finance officers that were there about the fact that they suddenly put it up overnight and didn't warn anybody. It had a double whammy. I think anybody who watched council the other day will understand that it had a bit of a double whammy because it put costs up for local authorities who then all went and looked in the commercial sector, and some commercial loans were a lot cheaper. And it also, an unforeseen circumstances, the government had a bit of a black hole in its own finances because it wasn't getting the return on. So they reviewed it and they've gone back. And I think it's absolutely right that certainly at this moment in time that you're not allowed to use it to invest in supermarkets 200 miles away. As you rightly point out, I made it very clear from all the time I've had this job as corporate portfolio holder that we would not be using public money to invest out of this area. If we want to invest, it will be in Kirklees, creating jobs for Kirklees, keeping the Kirklees pound in Kirklees. So we were never going to get caught out by supermarkets or airports or head offices for BP and all the other infamous investment that's been made. Okay, hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just MRP again. My understanding originally, MRP, we were holding that funding back because we recognised that when the waste contract came to an end, there was going to be a significant uplifting cost. So if we're now using that MRP elsewhere, is that presenting a problem for us when we get to the end of the waste contract in a couple of years? A bit to Councillor Pinnock's point about the cliff edge when the MRP unwind ends. So we'll have the lack of MRP, but also a significant increase in our costs as a result of the waste contract, the PFI coming to an end. Just wonder if somebody, I'm not sure who's the right person to comment on that, but if somebody could comment on that, please.
I can see Eamon indicating, so I'll bring Eamon.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's a fair comment to raise because we have highlighted for a number of years the fact that the existing waste contract will be ending at a point in time. We have actually put some provision in our forward plans for the waste management PFI credit, the 3.2 million that contributed to revenue falling out. So that's already in there I think from 23-24 onwards, which is contributing to a baseline uplift there. Going back to the early point about we did apply some of the earlier years MRP flexibility to set up a specific waste strategy reserve, which is being drawn down over a number of years to support developments around waste, and there is still a balance there. I think it's one of these areas that needs to be as in all the other areas, constantly looked at and reviewed in light of emerging evidence. I'm sure you'll appreciate that there's likely to be a movement in terms of the national waste strategy that was set out by government a few years ago, and a relatively new strategic director, Colin Parr, is working with service and the organisation and potential partners about what the new waste contract will look like. and there's some significant capital already set aside, headline capital in our capital plans as well, to accommodate some of the renewal of some of the facilities and potential other approaches. So I think it will be looked at in around, because in terms of what's going to come forward from that as well, in terms of what the future shape and offer will be alongside the actual contractual side. In terms of the revenue impact, there's also the capital investment side as well, and that's part of our, I suppose, one of our sort of broader transformation agendas as well. And it's kind of quick moving in terms of nationally, and I know it's been shaped locally as well. So I think we'd expect start to see some emerging, more detailed business plans coming forward in terms of how that's going to shape up and what the resource requirement will be going forward. But it's certainly clocked, and I think it's on our corporate risk register as well, in terms of, you know, potential sort of future, I'd say, risk and also potential opportunities as well, because there might be some opportunities coming forward around that might mitigate some of the revenue costs that we would otherwise have associated with a potential price increase around that contract post PFI.
Thanks, Eamon. I think that's answered John's question, so thank you very much. I don't see anyone else indicating. I'm just going to Rachel. I think Rachel did it. I'll just read again aloud the revised suggested wording for the report, so that we're all absolutely clear. So it's 2.3.8. Officer recommendation is to maximise the remaining balance of MRP unwind of £49.5 million over the 2020 to 24 period to support the Council's medium-term budget strategy set out in the overall annual budget report to Cabinet on the 26th of January and Budget Council on 10th of February 2021. So that's the revised wording for that section. Are we all happy to approve the reports as amended? Excellent. I don't see any objection. So thank you very much, and thank you, James, Rachel, and all the team as ever for your work. Really appreciate it. So next item on the agenda is the external audit update. So I'll hand over to our friends at Grant Thornton.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just provide an introduction, and then Stephen will take you through the sections of the report that we need to look at today. Before we actually get to the report, one thing I thought would be useful to just raise with members since we last met as an update on what's happened with the Redmond review of local audits. So MHCLG has published its response to the Redmond review just before Christmas, and there are some interesting areas of response there. A supportive response, I think, and a response that recognises the pressures that the local audit market is currently under. In a nutshell, MHCLG has recognised that the timetable pressures, one which sort of run contrary to the needs to provide specialism in this sector, so is willing to extend the timetable from the 31st of July, which it's currently at in the accounts and audit regs, to the 30th of September, which is good news, and we think that's a good point for it to settle at that date. Whether or not we hit that next year, we will have to work to it, but of course we will all be playing catch up from a COVID perspective, and who knows how far the lockdown implications will still cover us into this current year. The other bit of good news from MHCLG's response is it's indicated a 15 million injection of funding to support the reforms. Some of that will go to the councils it'll all run through the councils, but some of it will be retained, I suspect, to cover the costs of doing things like preparing the additional narrative report, summary narrative report that's going to be required. Some of it will go to the regulators, and some of it will go to the audit firms to recognise the fact that audit fees have reached a level that's uneconomic in the marketplace, as reported by Redmond. The bit that MHCLG didn't pick up and run with was the recommendation to form a central leadership body called the Office of Local Audit and regulation. MHCLG remains to be persuaded on that. It's still an option, but I think the preference of government would be to find other ways of providing more cohesive leadership rather than going to the extent of setting up another public body, which would be a centralist sort of response to the issue rather than the sort of the principles of a more sort of local response. So that's where MHCLG is. We're continuing to engage with them, and I think this week or early next week I'm meeting with. They now have a Redmond implementation team as opposed to a Redmond reporting team. So that's it's they're clearly on with the implementation of as many recommendations as they can put through without the requirement for primary legislation, which will be that would be a challenge getting legislative time, given all the other competing pressures on Parliament for legislation post Brexit and in a whole other range of areas and other priorities. So that's MHCLG. Shall I move on, Chair? Yeah. Okay. So in terms of the report that you've got today, this is our ISA 260 report, refreshed. You've seen virtually everything in that report. What we've done is highlight just the things that have changed to make it easier for members to look at. We hadn't intended bringing this report back to this meeting. We thought, following our last meeting, that we would be able to sign the accounts off before this point, and members will recall that delegation was provided for the Section 151 officer and chair to approve the accounts and get the audit completed before this stage. Now, I think that delegation still exists, but the fact that we're here and the fact that we are talking to you with a revised report means that I think technically, this is a matter for the committee, but technically you don't need to use that delegation now, and you could revert back to your normal approval arrangements. But that's something for you to reflect on. So why are we reporting this to you when we hadn't planned to? And the answer to that Stephen will cover, but in essence, it's because when we last talked to you, we were talking about a number of unadjusted misstatements in the accounts. One of them related to pensions was still to be worked through. And when we did manage to work it through with the pension fund's auditor and with the pension fund, the impact of that was higher than we'd anticipated, which brought the effect of all the unadjusted errors to somewhere around materiality. It was too close, or in fact even just over materiality. So we felt we couldn't run with a level of unadjusted errors. So we would need to make some changes to the accounts that you had looked at the previous time. So we thought that given the extent of those changes, it was appropriate for us to go back to members and inform you of what has developed since we last met. So at that point, if Stephen can explain it, I don't feel it's too significant and nothing that will affect the bottom line of the council's accounts and so on. But certainly it's worth just running through this position which has changed since our last meeting.
Okay, thanks, John. Am I okay to do that then, Chair? If I'll press on, yeah. Yeah, so like John said, we certainly didn't expect to be coming back to you with an updated audit findings report following the November meeting, but they are quite unusual times, and we did have this matter that arose regarding the pension liability that we did need to address. So the report itself starts on page 45 of the pack, and it's a long report, and as John just mentioned, you'll be familiar with it from the last audit committee when I presented it. So I'll just talk through the key areas which are highlighted in yellow. And explain the changes so that you fully understand the final position. So page 47 of the pack, that listed the items that were outstanding at the time the report was published. So there's been a few changes there, as you'd expect. So we've now completed the IAS 19 pension liability work, which I'll come on to. Yeah. We've now received the updated draft accounts. They came through yesterday, and we are working through those draft accounts to make sure that the amendments tie in with what we expected. So we now just have the final closing quality control steps for us to complete, really. And we'll be asking James to confirm to us that there's been no subsequent events. So we'll be sending an email and expect to get that back. It's a routine matter. We also mentioned on that page about the whole of government accounts work, which we wouldn't normally start until we've got to a final position with the draft accounts. So we'll be doing the whole of government accounts work over the next few weeks, and we'll be able to issue our certificate to say that we've completed the audit once we've done the whole of government accounts. But that won't prevent us from giving you the opinion, which means you can publish the accounts on your website hopefully in the next few days or the next week. So the key issue, really, page 53 sets it out in the pack, and it's regarding the local government pension fund liability. That's where the extra work cropped up earlier. So Mazars, who are the West Yorkshire Pension Fund auditors, they concluded their work by the 30th of November deadline. It's not helpful that all these deadlines come together at the same point, really. So they provided us with their audit findings report, and that showed an extrapolated investment valuation error in the pension fund accounts of 68.8 million. Now they operate to an eye-wateringly high materiality level. That figure wasn't material to them. They didn't adjust their accounts, but it was material to Kirklees. So we did need to spend quite a bit of time going back to Mazars and back to the pension fund to understand what had happened in the pension fund's accounts and how it impacted upon the Kirklees accounts. And after quite some time, we determined that your share of that extrapolated error would have been £8.35 million. But it's based upon an extrapolation, and we wouldn't expect you to adjust your accounts based upon an extrapolation conducted by a third-party auditor, if you like. So we got to the bottom of how that's actually made up. I should also point out, really, that the matter entirely related to the pension fund audit and the fund's record, so it was nothing to do with your finance team. Your finance team rely entirely upon the figures that come to you from the pension fund. That page of the findings report also then talks about an estimated understatement of the pension liability of 1.65 million, which relates to the recent Goodwin legal case. Again, it's an estimate and it's not material. We wouldn't be expecting you to amend, but given the magnitude of these unadjusted errors, we need to put them all in the pot to understand them. So the impact of both those items and the wider impact is reported at Appendix C to the audit findings report, which is on page 80. So what you'll see there is that the accounts had to be amended for the £5 million overstatement of care home valuation, which originally was planned to be unamended, but it had to be amended for that. It needed to happen because otherwise the cumulative effect of the pension errors plus the care home errors would be creeping above our audit materiality level. So I think that's the reason, which John alluded to, why we had to actually investigate this further and the adjustments had to be made. So the unadjusted misstatements for the pension issue, that's set out on page 83 of the pack. In absolute terms, it's around £10 million. Our materiality is 13.25 million. I need to also point out as well that there was a further unadjusted error, which isn't in Appendix C, but I will be putting it in there, and it's a late issue regarding creditor accruals. It's an extrapolated error that we discovered. It was £788,000. When I issue the final audit findings report and letter of representation, I'll make sure those are in there, but it's just above our triviality level. We have to bring it to your attention for that reason, yeah. It's not material. It's based again upon estimates. We agree with management's view, really, not to amend on that. Yeah. So just to summarise, we're going to do some detailed checking of the draft accounts that came through yesterday. But that's well underway. Yeah. We've got some file inspections by our internal quality file reviewers and a partner panel, but we expect that to all be completed in the next few days, by which time we should be able to issue the opinion. Yeah. We aren't waiting on any responses from the finance team. It's really just with the audit team now. So no pressure on the finance team there. So John mentioned there about in terms of process, I suppose we need to be clear about how the accounts are going to be approved now, but there is delegated authority in place for the Section 151 officer and for the chair to receive our opinion. That might not be necessary given what John just said, but that authority stays in place. So just to conclude, really, I mean, I do need to thank Eamon and James and Rachel and the team for bearing with us. It's been a long and drawn out process. We do recognise the extra effort, especially Rachel, who's had to put through these amendments at a rather late stage for the care home valuations at the same time as doing the Treasury management reports that she's just presented and the budget reports. So we do appreciate your support and patience with that. Hopefully that's the key areas. So unless John or Eamon want to say anything else, then I'm happy to take any more questions that you might have. Thank you.
Yeah, nothing further from me.
Thank you, Stephen and John, both very really helpful updates on the key issues. I can see James has appeared on screen. Did you want to come in, James, or is that just a mystery? Tease? Yeah.
I was giving you on standby, but thank you, Chair. To confirm that I had a conversation with Stephen earlier, and we thought probably the most pragmatic approach was if those delegations from the last meeting were still in place. From our point of view, we would just be happy to allow sort of section 151 and yourself, Chair. We'll go through the amends to the accounts with you in a private session. If you're comfortable, then we'll sign them off. As Stephen pointed out, the issues come about from work with the pension fund that dropped really late, and the previous one that we would have left as an unadjusted error, and we've just now adjusted for. So it's not a major one. It's not something that affects sort of the bottom line figures. It's a reval error in essence. So that's just from the author's perspective. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything as well at this point.
Hi, Chair. Very brief appearance. Nothing from me. I'm happy with that approach if members are.
Eamon, that's a first. I can see Julie's hand, so I'll bring Julie in.
Hi members. I'm just looking back actually at the minutes of the meeting, and I do agree that we were going to delegate authority, but I don't think that those are that's properly represented in the minutes if I check it. So my view would be, if you want some time to do that, that we are clear in the minutes this time that the delegation is to you and to Eamon as Section 151 officer to agree the final accounts based on the information that you've received today from GT. I absolutely agree that was the case, but it doesn't look like this is properly represented in the minutes. I'm not quite sure why that's the case. I do absolutely recall that, and I've got my notes from the last meeting which should suggest that. So let's make sure that that's properly reflected, please, today. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. I certainly recall it as well, so we should have picked that up when we're reviewing the minutes. But yes, I trust members are agreeable to us delegating authority to myself and Eamon, as Julie outlined. Please indicate if not. I'll bring John Roberts back in.
And just one other point, as it occurs to me, the annual governance statement, which is a statement as at the date that the audit is concluded, will need to be re-signed as well. I'm not sure who is the signature on your annual governance statement, but whoever that was will need to re-sign that statement.
Julie, can you just clarify for us who that would be, just so that we're aware?
It's the chief executive and the leader who normally sign it. It's their report, but that can be re-signed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Is everyone on the committee content with that? Excellent. Right. Unless anyone's got anything further to add, we'll say thank you very much for all of your work as our external auditors, and we really appreciate you joining us at the meeting today. Right. The next item is number 10, which is our risk management update for the item taken in public. So I'll hand over to Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everyone, or afternoon as it is now. So a couple of papers from me in public, and then we go into private session, and when we can talk about the papers again in the private session, because the private session obviously includes some material that is of a confidential or semi-confidential nature. So the risk management report or risk management update, the role of this committee in relation to the council's risk management procedures is to oversee that effectively there is a procedure in place, and not necessarily per se to to actually contribute to the process. So it's to understand that there is a process in place and being satisfied that that process is operating broadly successfully. So the report that I've prepared for you all is basically a very short summary of the position with regard to how it's operated during 2020, and then to sort of basically give you the material that we've created over the year and used to have a see, so that you can see an example of what process have been followed. It's true to say that the council's processes involve a number of stages. So services are supposed to make statements on risk management. The council has a risk panel in place. The risk panel, or I, on behalf of the risk panel, then report into ET. That's meant to go up through LMT, and that's essentially the end of the process, but subject to scrutiny and/or this committee's annual review. During the pandemic, or since March, we've followed the same procedure largely. The executive team have considered reports actually probably slightly more frequently than normal, but for reasons that are sort of less clear, we've had a role whereby our corporate scrutiny team has reviewed the papers, which has actually been really helpful and useful. So that has brought some advantage to the process. So that's how we've done the sort of political governance of the process rather than through LMT. So that really is a description of where we've got to, and members may well be interested in just then sort of having a review of the corporate matrix in the public session. This is the long-standing matrix. If you've got a paper version, unfortunately it's in black and white. Those of you looking to it on screen will know there are some sort of green parts, which are the parts which essentially are new and coronavirus related. They're sort of highlight issues that have arisen. Otherwise, the matrix hasn't changed an awful lot over the last year, because this is a list of the long-standing risks that pertain to the operation of a local authority, almost any local authority, and indeed many private businesses. So this is a list of the core risks that probably apply almost every year, and is important for those charged with governance to understand that those are some of the risks that they're looking after on behalf of the Kirklees community. The trend arrows are probably the thing that changes most commonly, and you'll see that there are an awful lot of them in this particular document that are going upwards. This is a public document. Em and James share it as part of the accounting information on a fairly regular basis, and any member of the public who comes along and asks to see it can have the most recent version. So that's the status that we're at this particular stage on risk management. So whether anyone wants to ask me any questions about risk management at this point is for...
Has anyone got questions for the public section? I can see Councillor Pinnock's put a hand up, so I'll bring Councillor Pinnock in. It's happened again, Kath.
Whoops.
Now your video is gone.
Good job I was muted at that point. The only comment I'd make really is I don't think it's adequate, I guess is a mild word, that the Corporate Audit and Governance Committee doesn't oversee, just is required to oversee the process. I think that's all my, I've had been on various audit committees of different organisations, and the audit committees are always responsible for the content of risk management, and the fact that we aren't, I think, is not healthy, and I will leave it at that.
Okay. I'm not going to respond to that, Chair. I mean, there is no real reason why we can't change that if that's what the committee feels, and that actually you can have the quarterly, the quarterly update reports that we sort of produce, and contribute in and comment on them as they go along. But the attempt there is to separate the responsibility of management to do risk management, which is officers and cabinet, from the responsibility to oversee that you're broadly assured that the council has a system in place. But that is a matter of choice of the committee, and I suppose I don't know whether Julie wants to, but she does. Yes.
I don't know whether that's a hanging hand or not. So, Julie, would you like to come in?
It was a hanging hand, and I was in the process of looking and checking the terms of reference actually for Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. I'm not quite sure it's quite as specific as Martin may have indicated, i.e. it's up to you to decide whether you want to do it. I think I think Martin was right to indicate the split between the role of the executive and managing risk and the role of audit to oversee that and to challenge that as appropriate. I haven't managed to locate shuffling papers, the terms of reference, but let's check that. And we'll come back to it at a later date if we feel that there's a need to change that. And obviously there'll be an opportunity to look at the Constitution and refresh things as part of a review which will go to annual council. Annual council's currently in the diary for the 19th of May, but obviously that may change subject to where we get to with the event before then. But if we assume that that's the case, then there'll be an opportunity to look at that again, and we can certainly put that on the agenda, should that be something that members want.
I think the key issue is whether or not we get, as I think Martin really said it, get adequate assurance from receiving these reports and knowing that the work and processes are ongoing, and then us being able to reflect back our comments and notes in having received those reports in these meetings. It's not something I've been concerned about. I feel we do get adequate assurance from that, but I'd be interested to hear if any other members have any other views or feel strongly. No. Okay. Martin, shall we move on to the public section of the quarterly report for internal audit, and then we'll move to private session?
Yes, Chair. Thank you. So this is the third quarter report of 2020-21 from internal audit. It addresses the position with regard to the amount of work that we have achieved against the broad assurance plan and other things that we've been doing in order to assist the council. So on the positive side, we have done in the third quarter of this year a reasonable amount of assurance work. It's slightly more restricted in its scope than it would have been otherwise, because we've done it basically electronically and by discussion with individuals rather than physically visiting places and checking paper and traditional style records. So it's marginally restricted, but in terms of the broad assurance and because of the general dependence of the council on core IT systems that are largely operating as they were designed remotely, as they would have done if people were sitting in offices, the bulk of the assurance broadly sits there and is correct. So we've done work on areas like housing rent, service charges, business centre income, grounds maintenance income, vehicle maintenance, taxi licensing, and a number of adult social care related areas. We've also and we've got positive outcomes on almost all of those, and we've got very positive outcomes on some of them, and positive outcomes on the majority. As for other areas, we continue to support things like information governance, stronger families, monthly pay, etc. That's the synopsis of where we've got to, and we can do the detail in the private session. From a point of view of making progress so that this committee can reach a conclusion, hopefully in April, about whether the council can be broadly assured about its arrangements for business control during the year 2021. I think that we have got in place a plan that will collect sufficient evidence that will enable you to do that, and that is largely related to the work that we have already done and the work that we will do that we have ongoing at the moment and will do in the next 11 weeks or 10 weeks. that's probably all I need to say at this particular chair. There's a little bit more detail when we come to the private session.
Right. Does anyone have any questions or comments they'd like to make before we move into the private session? No. Right. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you to everyone who's watching. If you are watching, we'll now be moving into private session as per the wording in agenda item 12 as it relates to Local Government Act 1972. So I'll just say thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.